So when I'm here, I have my Ward versus Gotti, which that was a fight that it's crazy that you commentated and you can feel the passion behind the narration of how you guys explained it. And that fight was just absolutely magnificent. So when
I called all three of those fights. And obviously the first one is the one that most people remember the most, but they were all remarkable stories of courage and dedication and commitment, and perfect examples of how I often discuss that when you see two fighters going at each other in what appears to be a murderous fashion, and they deliver the same kind of punishment round after round, and they are stretching themselves to the maximum of their capability to do damage against each other. What they're really doing is falling in love. And when they fall into each other's arms at the end of the 12th round, that's real. That's a reflection of their affection for each other and their respect for each other, and the fact that they now know each other better than anybody other than maybe their mothers. They've tasted each other's sweat. They've tasted each other's blood. They felt each other's commitment in the most palpable way. And Arturo and Mickey were the epitome of that kind of fight. And so I look back at all three of them with great respect and admiration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I seen that first fight. I still get chill bumps. You know, they just make my hair stick up on my arms when I think about the 9th round with Gotti versus Ward, and how Gotti, you know, took that blisterous beating and still was able to come back in the 10th round and do his own damage. Like you said, it was a masculine love affair when it came to these particular guys, and they did it again and again. And it just showed you that there was really no trash talk between those guys.
Well, you know, and Mickey wound up delivering the eulogy at Arturo's funeral, and they, you know, became best friends. The most poignant moment of the entire trilogy is after the 3rd fight in Atlantic City, when they refused to go to the post-fight medical observation unless they could go in the same med truck with each other. They needed to share that the way they had shared the ring, because by that time they were bonded brothers in every possible way. And I can still hear Emmanuel screaming, "Oh my God," in that 9th round. "Oh my God." My man.
Wow. Yeah, Emmanuel is definitely a legend. So can you tell us, I know he was close to you, Emmanuel Stewart. Can you tell us some memorable moments about you and Emmanuel Stewart, if you care to share?
The best story is I was in my first year or so of calling fights at ABC Sports. I'd been assigned to call boxing at ABC Sports by an executive who thought that that was a good way to get rid of me. That he would embarrass me in front of the audience, that he would embarrass me in front of my peers by assigning me to boxing. He had no idea that the very first sports event my mother had ever sat me down to watch a year after my father died, when I was 6 years old, was Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world on Gillette Friday Night Fights in 1955. And I had watched Gillette Friday Night Fights all the way through my childhood and teenage years. Onward from there, I was a huge boxing fan. The very first live prize fight I ever attended was Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964 in Miami Beach for the heavyweight championship of the world. So I had a brand as a boxing fan, and this guy had no idea, and he assigned me to boxing to try to get rid of me. And the first several fights I called on television at ABC were Mike Tyson fights. The other thing he didn't realize, besides that I was a boxing fan, was that the network had just signed a get acquainted, look-see contract with a 19-year-old heavyweight from upstate New York who was going to become a colossal attraction. And eventually it was because of my several Tyson fight calls on ABC that I was invited to come to HBO and take over ringside commentary at HBO, which became the greatest experience of my lengthy broadcasting career because of all the great fights and great personalities we covered at HBO.
Oh, wow. So you were able to experience the growth and the narration of Mike Tyson from youth to championship status to rise to fall. You were there for it all, pretty much. That must have been something.
I met him when he was 19. And on my first trip to upstate New York, and the very first live prize fight I ever called on television was Mike Tyson versus Jesse Ferguson in Glens Falls, New York. And that was the famous nosebone fight when Mike, in the post-fight interview, said to Alex Wallow, I was trying to drive his nosebone into his brain. Customata taught me that the purpose of the uppercut is to drive the opponent's nosebone into his brain. And I was standing on the opposite side of the ring listening to that and thinking, oh my gosh, look at what I've happened into here. I've been assigned to this sport, and this executive had openly told my agent, I'm doing this to get rid of him. It's going to embarrass him. He won't be able to do it well, et cetera, et cetera. And now I was getting some training in doing blow by blow from a really great boxing fan and student named Alex Wallow, who was the expert commentator, and he was an executive at the network, and he got me started. And 1 year of calling fights at ABC, I did leave to get away from that executive. There was no point in continuing to beat my head against a brick wall. And almost immediately upon my departure, I got asked to come call the fights at HBO because Tyson had gone to HBO, and now I was there with him. So my career followed Mike Tyson, and he had a great deal to do with my ability to be accepted by the audience calling fights and do it in an ear-pleasing way.
Nice. That's absolutely spectacular. What do you think from HBO? Do you feel possibly maybe, Jim, will HBO Sports ever come back?
No. And I don't understand it at all. It was December 8, 2018, when we did our last HBO boxing telecast on the air, and the new ownership from AT&T had made clear that they were going to get rid of the boxing franchise. Chief executive of AT&T told me that at a post-Emmy party in Hollywood that year. And I remember asking our previous boss, Richard Plepler, the chairman of the board of HBO, if he understood any reason why AT&T wanted to get rid of boxing. And he said, no, I don't get it at all. And that was that. And obviously, that was the end of my regular gig calling fights. I've been around a couple since then, and recently called a fight in Times Square, first time since 2018. But by and large, haven't had a regular gig since I worked at HBO Sports.
Wow.
Wow. And does anybody remember HBO Sports? I mean, seriously, what's going on there now? That network, Max, as they call it, has no identity as far as I can tell. And they got rid of HBO. I mean, they got rid of boxing. They got rid of Wimbledon. They got rid of all the things that had helped to contribute to the identity of the network.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on it. The Roy Jones Jr. fights, the Julio Cesar Chavez fights, the Marco Antonio Barrera fights, the Oscar De La Hoya fights. These fights molded HBO, and HBO was they had a hand-in-hand job with making these guys who they were.
Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns.
Ray, yes.
We could go on and on and on. And HBO's contribution to boxing and boxing's contribution to HBO, it was mutual. But for whatever reason, the cell phone salesman from Dallas who bought the network, decided they wanted to get rid of it, and they did. And I came here to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to teach a course in broadcast communication.
Okay, well, I'm glad that that's something that kept you busy, but of course, you're successful in whatever you do based on your illustrious career in commentary. You know, you inspired me to want to be I was an amateur boxer in Louisiana with silver gloves. That's what we had in Louisiana, our circuit. But if anything, I said, well, if I wasn't going to be a boxer, it would definitely be a boxing commentator because of the overall interest and passion and love that I had for the sport. You know, I was that guy that looked at KO magazines and Ring magazines and Books A Million and just read up on boxers. And when Floyd came with HBO 24/7, everyone got the point. The point is boxers have lives and they have backstories. And that's why people love Rocky, because they seen Rocky and Apollo and Paulie, and they seen these characters and these people that make up these fighters that they're involved with day-to-day activities. So when you do see those little segments in 24/7 and HBO, you're thinking to yourself like, wow, these guys actually have a life besides, you know, giving each other damage and competitive and athletes. They actually have personality and characteristics, and people became more involved in it. So those are the things that I looked up at and looked up to, like yourself. So
it is the most graphically human sport. It is the sport that teaches us the most about our limitations and our possibilities. It is the sport that requires the most courage, initiative, and self-definition in order to succeed. It is the sport that engenders the greatest level of love between its competitors. There are so many things that are unique and special about boxing. I could talk about it all day. And I'm just grateful to my mother that when she sat me down in 1955 to watch a sports event 1 year after my father died, she chose Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world, and said, watch Robinson. He's my favorite fighter because he dances when he fights. And I saw that. So yeah, I think there are many wonderful and amazing things about boxing, most especially the people. Every year I go back to Canastota, New York for induction ceremony at the International Boxing Hall of Fame, see the fighters. You mentioned Marco Antonio Barrera and Morales have been there the last couple of times I was there, and they spend every minute with each other. They're very much like Gaddy and Ward. You can't separate them because their experience is so deeply entwined with each other. And, you know, they are the two people who know each other better than anybody in the world. So I get a thrill every time I go back to Canastota, hang out with those fighters. And Mickey was there this year, and it was great to see him.
How is Mickey Ward doing these days? I know he had a movie from Mark Wahlberg, which was great, which was a great movie. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that he was able to get his story out. I know he recently had some type of issues with maybe CTE, maybe.
Mickey's Mickey. You know, I don't know of a single fighter who shows absolutely zero ill effects if they've spent 15, 20 years in the ring. Right. I don't know of a single fighter who spent 15, 20 years in the ring who would trade that experience for anything else. I don't know any of them who say to me, I totally regret it. I wish I'd never done it. I wish I'd never laced on boxing gloves, etc. That's not where they are. That's not who they are. It's central to their being, and it's central to their self-definition, and it's central to how we learn what we learn from them, which is a lot.
I absolutely agree. It's almost like a drug that no one else knows besides the circle of people that's involved in that particular sport. You know, because you've seen fighters leave. I'm retired, then I'm coming back. Then I'm retired, then I'm coming back. So you see that trend. You see like, well, hey, I can't let it go. You know, and that's, you know, like Sugar Shane Mosley's coming back.
Nothing they will ever do in their lives is going to make them feel as alive and as connected to their souls as what they do when they are in the ring facing off against each other.
Agreed.
And nobody else they ever meet in their lives is going to earn their respect and eventually their affection the way their best opponents in the ring will. It's a unique experience. And I don't know how to describe it any other way, but I saw it, I felt it, I discussed it with many, many fighters. I know what they feel.
Jim, I know you have many, 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 many memorable moments in the sport. Do you have any that stick out amongst the others? Do you have a favorite?
Well, Gaddy Ward, Barrera Morales,
Okay.
Getting to know Mike way back in the early days, getting to know Lennox and a lot of other great fighters, calling fights with Roy Jones and Larry Merchant and Max Kellerman and Emmanuel Stewart, who became my closest friend ever in life, closest male friend I ever expect to have. All those things are very special to me. Somebody asked me this morning, okay, you called a lot of Manny Pacquiao fights. What moment do you remember as the best moment from a Manny Pacquiao fight? And instantly I came up with, because I saw it in my head, the moment in either the second or third fight with Eric Morales, when Pacquiao had knocked Morales down, and Morales was seated under the ropes on his butt on a far side of the ring, and he looked across the ring at his father in the corner, his father, the trainer, who was looking at him for feedback. And Morales looked at him and went like that, which, he was basically saying, there's no way. And that was the kind of fighter Pacquiao was, that he destroyed you and did it in such a way that you almost couldn't believe what was happening to you. But Manny was amazingly skilled and amazingly gifted. And to do that to a fighter like Morales, who was himself great in every way, was quite a statement.
Yeah, I want to say that was the third fight when he was under the ropes, and I remember him looking at his father across in the corner, and he kind of gave him a little wink, and and then and I don't know, he didn't get up after that. You could tell the effort had left based on the decision, that nonverbal decision, like no, this is
there's no point, was basically what he was saying to his dad, and it was an amazingly honest moment from a fighter, and surprised me because Eric was in a lot of ways indomitable, but he saw what he saw in Manny Pacquiao, and eventually we all saw that.
It's crazy. I remember when when Ledwaba was introduced.
Ledwaba.
Yeah.
Larry and I saw him on the undercard of Lennox Lewis versus Hasim Rahman in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right.
We were pretty certain this is the best 122-pound fighter in the world. How could anybody be better than him? He had so much class and grace and skill, et cetera, et cetera. And Pacquiao was chosen like a rabbit out of a hat to be an opponent for Ledwaba on a top-ranked pay-per-view undercard in Las Vegas. And I'd never seen Manny Pacquiao before. Never forget this scrawny, skinny kid came to a fighter meeting and sat down with us and described how he had survived growing up on the streets of General Santos City in the Philippines by selling stolen cigarettes for food. And I was thinking, wow, what an amazing ragamuffin. What chance does he have against Ledwaba? And of course, he went into the ring and took him apart the following day, just dismantled him like taking apart a bomb. But Manny was an astonishingly gifted fighter and an astonishingly gifted person. I was at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony a couple of weeks ago, and Manny was inducted, and he got up to give a speech. No notes, 10, 12, maybe 13 or 14 minutes. It was a fairly lengthy speech. All English, no hesitancy, no stumbling. Perfect. Could not have done better. I know that his experience running for office in the Philippines probably had something to do with that. But I followed him into the restroom afterward, and I said, Manny, I just got to tell you, I'm so proud of you for what I just saw, because I first met you in a fighter meeting room in Las Vegas 24 years ago when you could barely put 3 words of English together. And he smiled. He understood what I was saying about him. But he went on to become one of the most remarkable people, not just remarkable fighters, one of the most remarkable people I've ever met.
Wow. Yeah, he was definitely a role model to many, many, many people in the character that he had. I do agree. Jim, did you enjoy the Wembley experience, and what did you think about the English fans?
Max Kellerman called it the greatest sports event he had ever been to in his life, and we're talking about Anthony Joshua versus Vladimir Klitschko in Wembley Stadium. I'd been to Wembley before that for a variety of other things. I had been to Wembley for the Rugby League Cup final several years before, and that had even bigger attendance. I think there were 100,000 people at the Rugby League Cup final. There were 94,000 or 95,000 at the Joshua versus Klitschko fight. But it was an amazing night, an astonishing fight. The thing I'll never forget is Joshua walking to the ring and getting up into the ring and standing in his corner, looking across the ring at Vladimir, and then turning around, turning his body all the way around and looking out at that sea of an audience, those 99,000 people, and smiling as if to say to himself, look at what I've done. And at that moment, I felt very proud for Anthony Joshua in his home country at an event like that, with an audience like that, being celebrated the way he was.
Now, that was a huge event. Now, did you have any predictions, or were you just there for the show? Did you have any pre-predictions?
I don't remember what I predicted in that fight. I was a big Vladimir fan. Okay, yeah. I was a Vladimir supporter, and I thought a lot of Vladimir, and of course Emmanuel, and all of that. But I knew Joshua, and I thought Joshua was great too, and I didn't know who was going to win the fight. And at the end of the day, Anthony got the last blow in.
Yeah, it was a very memorable fight. I mean, very competitive fight. I had Vladimir. I didn't think AJ, with the amount of fights that he had, versed on Dr. Steelhammer's experience and knockout ratio, I didn't see it happening. And I watched it with my father, and that was one of those things that we saw, and we were on the edge of our seats watching this fight. And it was people that were watching the fight that I heard from, because they know I'm a huge boxing fan. And they were like, Kurt, they were MMA guys, UFC guys. And then they were like, Kurt, we watched Vladimir Klitschko and Joshua. Man, that was one hell of a fight. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, that shows you what type of impact that certain fights can have on people that they're not even fans. And, so it was a very memorable moment, but AJ really surprised me with that. And it was a very memorable fight. And I guess that would be something great to be a part of and witness for where you were ringside. So,
well, let's just say it was better than my preceding appearance at Wembley, which had been for a Bob Dylan and Van Morrison concert on a night when both of them were awful. And I would not have thought that was possible. I was a huge Bob Dylan and Van Morrison fan, and I went to this concert at Wembley Conference Center and watched them, and they were both terrible. They were both sort of throwing the whole performance away. And my 12-year-old daughter turned to me and said, Dad, do people like these guys? And I said, well, yeah, they think they do. They did. They loved them, when they were really, really good. But I understand why you're asking the question on this particular evening. So it was much more fun to be at Klitschko Joshua.
Oh, yeah. That was like night and day, I imagine, huh?
Yeah.
I just saw that fight. It was, excuse me, it was being replayed today. So I just rewatched the Klitschko Joshua fight. I was like, man, I know it was like epic.
It was being replayed today, really?
Yeah, on Roku. Yeah, they've shown it like for the past 3 weeks. They keep replaying it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, It's worth watching. It's always worth watching. And absolutely. I mean, both very technically skilled, big, powerful heavyweights.
Yeah.
Jim, let me ask you about the present state of boxing right now. Who do you think, because I know it's difficult, but who do you think is the best fighter pound for pound right now?
The best fighter pound for pound right at this moment. Well, I was going to say Tank Davis a few weeks ago, and then Tank Davis produced a lesser performance.
Sure.
I guess I would have to say whoever wins Canelo versus Crawford can stake a claim to number one pound for pound. They both have dramatically successful resumes. They both have fought superior opposition. They both can box and punch. I don't like the weight disparity in the fight. I think that's an awful big hill for Terrence Crawford to be climbing, fundamentally going up 21 pounds in weight to fight Canelo Alvarez. But the best way to help Terrence Crawford prove that he can do anything he wants to do is to tell him that he can't. He is a very stubborn and self-possessed human being, and I don't rule out his chance of winning the fight. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I would say whoever wins that fight, let's call him number one pound for pound.
Wow. Understood and agreed, because Canelo was there. He was there somewhere in the pound for pound list, and the arguments was back before Lomachenko, I think, fought Devin Haney. He was on that list as well for that number one. So whoever fought the latest or the most current become the number one. Either it's Vladimir or it's Bud Crawford, and then Usyk comes out from cruiserweight and starts toppling all the heavyweights. And what do you think?
Well, I think you can call Usyk number one pound for pound. It's not commonly accorded to heavyweights, but of course he's a smaller heavyweight who's going in and repeatedly beating bigger heavyweights with craft and determination, movement, skill. He's a great, great fighter.
Yes, he is. He's definitely a great fighter. And do you think Danny Dubois, being the IBF current heavyweight champion, do you think that he has learned or matured enough to be more of a threat this time, to become victorious against Alexander Usyk?
It was an extremely close fight the first time around, and I don't think that Usyk in any way embarrassed Dubois. And Dubois showed amazing power against Joshua in that last performance. So I've got to give him a pretty good chance to win the fight. Sooner or later, Usyk's going to stub his toe fighting against larger guys who have more punching power, but it hasn't happened yet. So let's wait and see.
Jim, let me ask you, what do you think it is about the rise of the Ukrainian fighters with like Lomachenko and Usyk and others coming up? Like, they just live, eat, and sleep boxing. Do you know why they're so great at boxing, the Ukrainian fighters?
Craft is king, and they have developed and supported a teaching system led by Vasily Lomachenko's father, which has instructed many great amateur and then professional fighters, Alexander Bostic, any number of others. And it's all about their intelligent, practiced, careful, well-developed craft. It's always the biggest difference in fighters. Do you know how to fight? Do you know what you can do? Do you know what you can do against the other guy? Do you know how to apply it in the ring in such a way that it wins the rounds? That's what boxing is.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I remember Alexander Usyk being at an Anthony Joshua fight, even when he was upset by Andy Ruiz. And he was there with a notepad, just kind of watching, engaging, and observing what AJ did. So that tells you his projection from something that he set out to do was from many years before.
Well, boxing was for a long time dominated by Americans. And everything changes over a period of time. Everything evolves. So you mentioned Ukraine. and all of the great fighters who have now emerged from Ukraine. We should also be tossing in at this moment our recognition of Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, who were brought up in the same training system in Russia and also have great craft, great understanding of what to do in the ring. So the teaching system, the instructional system in the United States has atrophied. I'm not going to say that it's completely gone away, but you don't find that many street corner Emanuel Stewards anymore. And great gyms are created when a great trainer brings talent together. Freddie Roach still doing it in Los Angeles at the Wild Card Gym. Freddie Roach, probably our greatest living trainer in America at this moment. But again, I don't see Emanuel anymore. I don't know of many trainers like him in the sport. And the ones that I do know are in Russia or Ukraine or Mexico or other places, Puerto Rico, other places besides the United States.
Speaking of Manny Stewart, yeah, I heard you say he didn't like to be called Manny, so Emanuel Stewart.
You've heard that. Yeah, that's right. He taught me. We were becoming friendly, and I called him Manny one day, and he said, "Jimbo, don't call me that. That's not what I want to be called. That's not what my mother called me. My name is Emmanuel." And wow. I never called him anything but Emmanuel from that point forward. Cosell invented Manny. That was Cosell's way of trying to communicate to the audience that I'm a closer friend to this guy than anybody else. And this guy likes me more than anybody else. That was something that Howard habitually did with big-time sports figures. So he started calling Emmanuel Manny because no one else did. And Manny bit his tongue for years until one day I said it, and he said, "Stop, don't call me that."
You're going to stop that trend, so yeah, that's definitely.
You want me to answer this question down here below?
Yeah. Andrew 23. He says, "Jim, how did you train your voice and overall delivery? For commentating, any exercises, books?"
My mother was an avid reader, and on Sundays she would read the New York Times and New Yorker columns on language. She was devoted to speaking proper English and speaking it well, and she shaped me. She insisted to me that I would not be casual about that I would pursue it in the same way that she did. And so the commentary you heard me deliver, the English that you heard me speaking on the air, that was definitely my mother's training and my mother's influence. And my book is dedicated to her and to my paternal grandmother, both of whom were great storytellers and taught me how to tell stories.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm real close to my mom too. In fact, we were at the Lennox Lewis Oliver McCall 2 fight in Vegas, and I got to take a picture with you at the Lennox Lewis after party at the All-Star Cafe. So you've always been a class act.
Emmanuel. And Lennox was also a mama's boy. Okay.
Oh,
Lennox,
really?
Yeah. Lennox's mother, Violet, was always the first person seated at ringside at his fights. She would show up before anybody else and sit in the front row at ringside for Lennox's fights. And Lennox he had been taken away from her at one point in London by child services. He had been sent to live with aunts and uncles who didn't want him in Kitchener, Ontario. And he waited years to get back together with his mother. And then they were never again completely separated. And Lennox married a woman. This is uncanny. Lennox's mother was named Violet. Lennox married a woman named Violet.
That is uncanny. That's
uncanny. And there's no question in my mind. It is a gesture. It is a salute. It was what felt to him like the right thing to do.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, because most girls want someone that if they had a strong father figure or father, they would want someone like their father. So that makes sense in essence. I never knew that story about Lennox Lewis. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely.
Wow.
Well, I mean, Emmanuel used to say to me, you say, Mike is seen by people as a bad dude. Lennox is seen as a tea sipping, guy with his little finger up in the air. The one who was really a bad dude on the streets was Lennox. And that's why Lennox was taken away from his mother in London and moved to Kitchener, Ontario, where a man named Arnie Bem taught him how to box. And eventually, Arnie Bem brought the 14-year-old Lennox Lewis from Kitchener, Ontario to Canastota, New York. Excuse me, not to the Catskills in New York, because Bem was friends with Customato, and he brought Lennox at age 14 to train with Mike when they were 14. They slept in the same room. They watched black and white fight films on the wall, and they got to know each other. And then, of course, many years later, they fought each other for the heavyweight championship.
Yeah, many years later, but it did happen. I remember a clip I keep hearing from Mike Tyson where he was getting along and befriending Lennox Lewis, and Customato was like, Mike, you're gonna fight him one day, and,
right. Yeah,
so
exactly right.
that does
Mike,
bring back memories.
Look, Mike was preternaturally sweet at his core. Mike was a sweet guy. He was a nice person. I loved Mike Tyson when I first met him. I was a little scared of Lennox when I first met him. But people never saw that because of the English accent, because of a variety of other things, because Mike was Mike. Everybody wanted to believe it was the opposite way around. That was not the case. I'll never forget, I was at one of the fights in Las Vegas. I think it might have been a Barrera Morales, one or the other, when I encountered Mike, and he came to do an interview with me, and we were standing in front of the camera waiting for the throw to do the interview. And Mike turned to me and said, you know that guy that I used to be when we were first together back in the day? And I said, baddest man on the planet? He said, yeah. He said, you know that? I said, I know that was never you. He said, that's right. That was never me. And it was so touching and amazing to me the way he said it to me at that moment. I love Mike. I love him with a deep passion. I love him because of his ability to be honest with himself and with the world.
Wow.
When was the last time you spoke to Mike Tyson?
A while ago. It's been, I'm not sure, sometime within the past few years.
Okay. Ago. So not that long ago, because it's crazy.
I was with him. Because he and his wife were running a charity in Las Vegas to gather money to buy school lunches for destitute school children in Las Vegas. School supplies and lunches. Mike was in charge of that, and he was doing some great things with it.
Oh, that's great. That's
What did you say that Mike Tyson told you off camera when you were in the dressing room after the Lennox Lewis fight? That was interesting.
He said, he looked up as I walked into the room, and he said, what exactly did people expect? I said, wow. Pardon me? He said, well, he's 6'6". I'm 5'10". I've known this since we were 14 years old. What exactly did people expect? And I said, well, they expected you to be the baddest man on the planet. And he said, yeah, well, you know about that.
Oh, that's classic. That is classic.
Great man. Wow. A really great guy. I love him. And I will honor and support him until the day I die, because he's a true friend and a legitimate high integrity person.
Can you take us back to the night where the world stopped when Buster Douglas shocked the world? Can you take us back to that night when Mike Tyson has been knocked out.
Look, thank you for remembering the call exactly the way it was delivered. Mike Tyson has been knocked out. That was meant to be flat, matter of fact, because you couldn't elevate it in any way. But I remember that I went to Tokyo thinking that this was a complete mismatch and that Buster should be a 42-1 underdog and that Mike was going to easily knock him out. And then if you watch the first few rounds, it wasn't mysterious. You could see what was happening even from the first or second round on. And I began to think in my head, well, now, wait a minute. Maybe there was a lesson that we were supposed to learn here, because if you went back over the preceding year, he had gone the distance with Tony Tucker. He had gone the distance with James Quick Tillis. He had gone the distance with Mitch Blood Green. He had gone the distance with
Oliver McCall.
James Quick Tillis. And there were people at ringside who had Tillis actually winning the fight against Mike. There were plenty of evidences that somebody who was longer, taller, had a good jab, had a right hand that they brought directly over the top where Mike might have difficulty seeing it, that person would have a chance to do real damage to Mike Tyson. And now here was Buster in the ring doing all of that. He was the best athlete of the whole group that I just mentioned. He had been a college basketball player. He had foot movement. He had hand skills. He had all of those things. Did he have courage, guts? No, we didn't think so. But he was enough bigger than Mike and enough technically superior to Mike on that particular day that all he needed was to just keep doing what he was doing, and he did.
Oh, nice. And that was it Buster Douglas's mother just passed away? And
yeah, she had passed away in the build up to the fight, and Larry Merchant was the one who recognized that might give him new impetus, a way of focusing in training that he might not have had before. I think, and Buster said something about it afterwards. So I think it was a factor in setting up the biggest upset in boxing history. I mean, it's still to this day the biggest upset in boxing history because 42-1 odds. Where do you find that?
Yeah. You don't. Normally you don't at all. In fact, a lot of people compare the Ruiz Joshua is the second behind that. What would you think would be the second?
Ruiz Joshua was a massive upset, no question. But I don't remember Joshua being a 42-1 favorite over Andy Ruiz.
No.
Maybe he should have been.
Yeah. But so what would you think would be the second biggest upset behind that? I know the first is the pinnacle, Tyson versus Douglas, but what would you think would be the second?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, I didn't look at that note on my cheat sheet before I sat down today. But I'll tell you the one that is the number one elevator fight. And by elevator fight, I mean, what's the fight about which somebody is bound to ask me when I get on a crowded elevator in New York or somewhere else, and somebody's going to turn around and recognize me. And that, of course, is Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And, you know, to this day, there are people who absolutely cannot reconcile the fact that Ray Leonard defeated Marvelous Marvin Hagler in that fight. Hagler fans in particular, of course. But that was a big upset. And by the way, if somehow Terrence Crawford pulls a genie out of a hat and defeats Canelo Alvarez, what is the style with which he could do that? Go back and look at Leonard versus Hagler. Get in, get out. Get in, flurry, get out. Get in, go to the body, get out. Always step out at an angle, never straight back. All the things that Ray did against Hagler, if Terrence goes in and replicates those things against Canelo, I think it would serve him well.
Wow. You know, that would have to be, because I've been watching Canelo versus a smaller fighter within Charlo. And I seen Charlo. Charlo was doing pretty good until he started getting hit.
Right.
And then he just went in a
Well,
massive
Canelo has real
decline.
punching power. Canelo has an impregnable chin. Canelo has a lot of the things that make it easy for him to be a skilled and effective counterpuncher. He'll take a punch to give a punch, but nobody's ever knocked him down. Nobody has. There is one official knockdown charged against him in a fight against Jose Cotto, Miguel Cotto's little brother. Jose Cotto caught him with a right-hand shot on the chest. He kind of fell back into the ropes. He bounced forward off the ropes, stumbling, and the referee very technically ruled that the ropes had held him up. That's the only official knockdown ever scored against Canelo Alvarez, and in my view, it wasn't a knockdown. Nobody has ever put him on the canvas. And I'm hoping that Terence Crawford isn't thinking that he's going to put him on the canvas. I think that for Terence to win, he has to be thinking that he can do what Leonard did against Hagler. Step in, land, step out.
Well, Floyd was able to outbox Canelo, beat him to the punch, reflexes, foot movement. Do you think he should follow that, or like you mentioned?
Well, Floyd was very gifted. Floyd did not burden himself with a mandate to entertain the audience. Floyd was perfectly happy to take the victory and walk away under circumstances which might cause restlessness in the audience, might cause a few people to boo here and there, et cetera, et cetera. He wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for wins. I think Crawford is a different animal than Floyd. I think Crawford is far more interested in real approval, and he fights with an inner fire that Floyd damped down. Floyd was ice. Terence is fire and ice.
Gotcha. Well, that's a good analogy. Speaking of Terence Crawford, what did you think about him and Errol Spence? How did you have Errol Spence? Because it's all said and done now. We got that. But
I didn't know that much about Errol Spence, to be totally honest with you.
Okay.
I knew that he was trained by a very acclaimed trainer who had been chosen as the trainer of the year. I had a tremendous partiality. I was not calling fights at that time. I was not doing anything professional at that time. So I was free to be a fan. And
Sure.
I was a Terence Crawford fan. And my favorite boxing writer, Tom Hauser, pointed out in a column after the fight, Hauser said there were quite a number of boxing journalists and reporters who saw Terence Crawford and Errol Spence as a pick'em fight. The one who didn't was Jim Lampley. Jim Lampley was firm and foursquare from the beginning in saying, no, Crawford is a different kind of personality. He's a different kind of fighter. He's not going to lose to Errol Spence. I mean this as no criticism or diminution of Errol Spence and his great skills. I think Terence Crawford is a special fighter.
So do I.
I believe he is too. I just think it's just something about him, the way he finds a way to win. Like Teddy Atlas said, he finds a way to win. A lot of fighters do it. Alexander Usyk has that element, that whatever it is, it's that they have that way to win. They figure out a way to exploit a flaw of whatever kind, and they win and they get the job done.
Yes,
So,
and Usyk is a good example, and Terence is a great example, and we've seen many others over the years. In fact, people ask me, okay, so who does Terence compare to in your view? And I say, well, he's a modern day Sugar Ray Robinson. He can box, he can punch, he can do whatever he has to do to win the fight, and you're never going to convince him that he's not going to win. And that's what Robinson was, and that I think is who Terence Crawford is too.
and speaking of the great Sugar Ray Robinson, you can't tell anyone. I was just telling Jay Roos this. You can't tell anyone about your own testimony or your own conviction. The Jimmy Doyle situation, and the dream that he had before that, and then all these people assured him, like, it's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. And, he's going to be fine. And the inevitable
Anytime
happened.
two men go into a ring, it's possible. Sure, they're not playing chess; they're hitting each other, and in most cases, as hard as they can hit. So we cannot be shocked. And the first one I watched was Emil Griffith versus Benny Kid Barrett. I was watching Gillette Friday Night Fights in my mother's house in South Florida, watching Griffith and Barrett, and I learned something very deep and meaningful to me, which was that fighters could die. I wound up calling 4 different fights. I can't even name them all anymore. Wound up calling 4 different fights in which someone arrived at his turning point, arrived at his demise. Gabriel Willis versus Jimmy Garcia. Jesus Chavez versus Levander Johnson. There are a couple of others. And painful, difficult, sticks in your gut for a while, but you can't tell me that fighters don't know. I think they know. I think they recognize and understand that they take that risk.
Were you at all concerned for George Foreman the night where he was to fight Michael Moore? Were you concerned that
I wasn't concerned for Foreman's health because Moore to me was more of a boxer than a puncher. He did have punching power, but I didn't think he was going to take the kind of risks that would be necessary to land big shots against George. And he knew that George, if he tried to land big shots, that George could counter him. And so I did not expect Moore to be in any kind of danger or George to be in any kind of danger that night. As it turned out, Moore was in danger of losing the heavyweight championship to a 45-year-old man who had figured out how he could do that.
Wow. And didn't you say George told you that exactly how it was going to go?
More than once. We were working together. We were expert. He was my expert commentator. I was the blow-by-blow guy. And in the weeks leading up to the Moore fight, several times, maybe 3, maybe 4, I would pull him aside from crew meals, fighter meetings, things of that nature where we were together, and ask him, George, how are you going to beat Michael Moore? He's a southpaw. He's a mover. He has great feet. Holyfield couldn't find him, and Holyfield's feet are better than yours. What's the plan? And every time I asked him, George would give me that blank, implacable George Foreman expression and say, you watch. There will come a moment late in the fight. He will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. Always the same words. He will come and stand in front of me and let me knock him out. Now go back to YouTube. Go back and look at the 10th round of Foreman Moore. Tell me that there's a better way to describe exactly what happened than that Moore came and stood in front of him and let George knock him out. And, for that to happen the way it happened, and I'm, as the count is mounting toward 10, I'm reaching for something to say in my mind, and that became, it happened because of what George had told me. It's really me talking to George, but it just goes to show you how much he understood about boxing, how clued in George really was as to what goes on in the ring and how you can manage it to your own advantage. He was great.
Do you think his movie, it did him justice?
Haven't seen the movie.
Oh, really?
No, I've not seen the George Foreman movie. I'll have to go look at it. Yeah. No. It's hard to do justice to a truly cosmic personality. And he is a truly cosmic personality. He's one of a kind. And so it's hard to do justice to that in any one enclosure, whether it's a movie or a book or whatever. He's too many things to too many different people. And I miss him. He died 2 weeks before the publication of my book. The prologue, the first thing you read in the book, is about the 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old George win his gold medal in Mexico City. The title, It Happened, comes from my call of his win over Michael Moore. There are various other ways in which he is central to the book and all over. He used to call me young man all the time we were working together at HBO. He called me young man this, young man that. And I would pull him aside and say, George, you're born January 12, 1949. I'm born April 8, 1949. We're fewer than 3 months apart.
Right.
You always call me young man.
Young man.
And he would say, well, because you're such a young man. So I gave up. Even though we were the same age, I was going to be young man to him. And it's been a while since he died, but I'm not over it. I still think about it every day.
Wow. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, because it was so subtle. It wasn't something that someone's health is declining or, you have prior knowledge of someone has an illness. But no, this just,
not
up and happened.
There was no warning whatsoever. I woke up and read that he had died, called the family and said, what was that? And all I was told was he just stopped breathing. So maybe he had a stroke of some sort. I don't know, but they've been pretty tight-lipped about it.
Right. Well, yeah, that's very unfortunate because I was actually on live and found out about it, and someone hit me in the trenches, which I call the live commentary, and like, hey, you hear about George Foreman? I'm like, no, what happened to George Foreman? And growing up, because I was a teenager, a young adult in the 90s, so when George, the audience was always either Jim Lampley, George Foreman, Larry Merchant, Jim Lampley, Roy Jones Jr., Larry Merchant, Emmanuel Stewart, Jim Lampley, George Foreman, or Larry Merchant. So it was always the audience that, my father laughed so hard when the fight was Lennox Lewis versus David Tua.
What a fight.
and you said, because we were all watching that fight, and the commentary is what builds the narration. It's the story of the fight. It's just the story of the fight. And when you said that Lennox Lewis is making David Tua's face look like an utter bloody mass, my dad hit the roof. It was hilarious, because
it didn't sound all that poetic, but
yeah.
I guess I got it across.
Yeah, I mean that fight actually it hurt my feelings because I was a big David Tua fan. Lennox Lewis not so much, but David Tua was that guy that was.
Would you call Tua versus Ibeabuchi the best heavyweight fight you ever saw?
Yes, yeah. The best non-title heavyweight fight.
Best heavyweight fight I ever saw, Tua Ibeabuchi.
Yeah.
Anybody who's watching now and hasn't seen it, I recommend you go to YouTube and get Tua versus Ibeabuchi. I believe they broke the record both for most punches thrown and most punches landed in that fight.
Yeah.
That was a classic fight. And what a lot of people don't know about Ibeabuchi, now that we are more educated in CTE and things of like that, supposedly, I don't know if it's true or not, but they're linking the David Tua fight, the clash he had with David Tua and Ike Ibeabuchi. They're linking the Ike Ibeabuchi damage, which he took in the Tua fight, because they took so many shots.
Wouldn't shock me.
And
he stood right in. David stood right in front of Ike and took those shots because David was convinced that his chin was impregnable. Nothing could hurt him.
Right.
So, and then he landed his own shots on Ibeabuchi too. And of course, Ibeabuchi was crazy to begin with. Ibeabuchi was the one who didn't train before the Chris Bird fight because he thought there were evil spirits in the air ducts of Curtis Coates.
Wow. Yeah. He was very particular when it came to those type of convictions.
Cedric Kushner was manager, promoter. And Kushner called Ibeabuchi's mother and said, why isn't Ike going to training in the gym with Curtis Coates? And Bucci's mother said, because Ike says there are evil spirits in the air conditioning ducts, and he doesn't want to train in a gym that has evil spirits in the air conditioning ducts.
Wow.
And Cedric, in his South African accent, said, well, Mrs. Bucci, tell him to turn off the air conditioner.
Right. That's a good idea.
Seems simple enough to Cedric, but Ike saw it a different way.
Yeah, it stopped the flow of the spirits. Easy. Yeah.
Wow. That is
All right, guys. I've got another date here coming up. Have you guys enough Jim Lampley, or do you want more?
Well, you know what? We will reconvene later on. It's
Okay.
We'll have.
Yeah,
another,
I'm happy to come back on at some point.
Absolutely.
You got my numbers and my contacts, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Beautiful.
It was a pleasure to spend this time with you, going down memory lane, past, present, and future, and we look forward to it on the next one.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed it. Yes, Mr. Salamatino, Bud wants to hurt people, so he puts himself in danger. He's got a pretty good chin. We'll see. It's a mystery fight. You have to favor Canelo because of the size factor.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Lampley. Have a great day. We'll see you next time. Okay, and that was the legendary Jim Lampley. Learned a lot, heard a lot. Good stuff. Thank you, Mr. Roos, for the interview. And no, really good guy, man. It's crazy to finally talk to him, speak to him. We got to do it again. We definitely got to do it again. Yeah, absolutely. So, but guys, thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for being respectful and paying attention and all that good stuff. I enjoyed it. I'm about to jump off of here because I got things to do as well. But we will reconvene when Mr. Roos contacts Mr. Jim Lampley, the legendary HBO commentary for HBO Boxing in the place to be. But until then, guys, everyone's been counterpunched. Have a great day. More videos to come, as you know, because I don't stop counterpunching, and neither does Jay Roos with his theories. So we will reconvene. Until then, everyone has been counterpunched. Peace.